I am delighted to welcome everyone here at the University of Tennessee and everyone who is tuning in to us online to the Anjali Lecture in Hinduism here at the University of Tennessee. I would like to also say a great thank you to the Patels who have generously supported and endowed this lecture. And it is my pleasure to welcome our speaker today, who will be introduced by Dr. Rachel Scott. Yes.
Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening. Tulasi Srinivas is a professor of anthropology and religion and transnational studies at the Marlborough Institute for Interdisciplinary Studies at Emerson College. She is also a fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society and the Indian Sociological Society. Tulasi is a decorated author and editor of 6 books and over 30 award-winning journal articles and book chapters. Her research focuses on comparative ethics. Her books explore themes such as wonder, beauty, and grace. One reviewer of her book, The Cow in the Elevator, An Anthropology of Wonder, isn't that just like the best title ever for a book? That reviewer captures one of its central themes. Quote, describing wonder as a transformative, revelatory, celebratory emotion that people strive to generate and inhabit in ways that allow them to both live in the moment and go beyond it. Srinivas attempts to knit together the various strands that make up the book by paying attention to wonderful or wonder-generating moments, end quote. In fact, I knew that we needed to invite Tulasi to UT when I heard a panel at a conference devoted to this book and its significant impact on the research of others. Her most recent work considers climate justice and religious ecology in the post-colonial context through the story of water in her hometown of Bangalore, India. Tulasi is an award-winning teacher and recipient of several prestigious fellowships, including the Women's Studies and Religion Fellowship and a Radcliffe Fellowship at Harvard University. She has also served as an expert for the World Economic Forum on matters of religion and was part of the WEF Davos Summit from 2005 to 2010. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tulasi Srinivas to the University of Tennessee.
Hear me? Yeah, good. Okay. So before I dive into the problem of pollution in Bangalore, let me just say I'm so profoundly grateful to you all for being here and for the Patels for endowing the Anjali family lecture, to the Department of Religious Studies here at Knoxville for inviting me, for Rachel for her warm invitation, and I am just having the best time. I just took a photograph in front of the dog, and I thought, this is amazing. And thank you most of all to Hitesh and Dimple for giving me the opportunity for testing out the basis of my next book here in the heartland, the South of America. One of my missions in scholarship is to make Hinduism more accessible to scholars or emergent scholars and Hindus themselves more broadly, to understand what a repository of knowledge this ancient theology is, its philosophies, its way of making meaning. And I look forward to our discussions at the end of my talk as we think through this together. Let me begin by saying that this talk is part of a book I'm currently struggling my way through. This book is the third part of a trilogy on my hometown of Bangalore, India. The first book in the series was the one that Rachel referred to, The Cow in the Elevator, An Anthropology of Wonder. in which I looked at priests and how they do alankara, or decoration of images of God, to provoke wonder. The second, The Goddess in the Mirror, is about beauty and how beauty, women in beauty parlors mirror the goddess through their decoration of self. And the last one, the third one from which I draw this talk, is tentatively titled The Runaway Goddess, a possible anthropology of grace. So you'll see here, my impetus in this trilogy is to look at large categories such as beauty, grace, and wonder that have classically been thought of as Christian categories of thinking, but I want to also demonstrate they are deeply rooted in Hinduism, though in very different ways. So here in this talk, I'll speak about a small corner of India, my hometown of Bangalore. It is no great tirtha, no sacred ford, no pilgrimage place. It's not an important site for Hindus at all. It's merely a place that I love and where I belong. Bangalore is known to the wider world as a place of biotech and information technology, software engineering, and service technicians related to these fields. It is the place where Americans usually call for help with mortgage loans, to find luggage, to reroute themselves for financial, for health transcription, etc. It's knowledgeware based of all kinds. So my questions revolve around knowledge. Knowledge of climate, knowledge of religion, knowledge of what constitutes a good life. I feel that in trying to describe and understand the climate crisis as it is felt in Bangalore is the most important life work I can do. Facts about climate change we're all familiar with, but it seems we can't comprehend them. We can't make sense of them. They're too large and too frightening. I'm convinced that to help us understand the breadth and depth of this climate crisis, we have to tell stories of little corners of the world that we love and try to make sense of this violence. Perhaps it's the stories of worlds we have lost or run the risk of losing, our families and friends, animals and birds that we're familiar with. Perhaps that's the powerful motivator we need to come to terms with the depth and complexity of the problem. It is the loss of our shared home. Part of the problem in dealing with climate change is not only the fractious political life we live in, but also one of imagination, evidenced in the language we have for describing these perils that we face. Anthropologists like myself have used the term the Anthropocene to describe this current era that we live in, implying that anthropos, mankind, has influenced this epoch. While descriptive and usefully critical, it distills a feeling of sort of fear and precarity in us, a dread of the current era. And so paradoxically and problematically, using the language of the Anthropocene leads us into grief and apprehension, but never beyond. So we lack the language and the ability to apprehend the problem and to articulate it effectively. It merely makes us look away. And so we live comfortably numb, as Nietzsche would say, in a nest above the abyss. Okay. But if we are to survive this apocalypse and fly beyond the abyss, to think and work our way through it or beyond it, we need to think beyond this critical and clinical analysis to rouse our passions, to feelings of joy, of abundance, and of hope and care. Religion is deeply implicated in this quest. The Christian theologians and religious studies scholars, Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, they argue that an environmental crisis of our existential complexity is not the result of certain economic, political, and social factors alone. Rather, it is a spiritual and moral crisis. And in order to address that, we need a broader philosophy. We need an understanding of nature that we do not have. Pope Francis, strangely, agrees. And in his Laudato Si, he says as much. He says, he supports the idea of Tucker and Grimm that states, religions need to be re-examined in the light of the current environmental crisis. This is because religions help to shape our attitudes, they say, towards nature in both conscious and unconscious ways. Religions provide basic interpretive stories of who we are, what nature is, where we have come from, and where we hope to go. The ethical and moral frameworks that structure how we think of nature are deeply embedded in religious stories. As the historian Lynn White said, what people do about their ecology depends upon what they think about themselves, about what they think about nature and about destiny, how they think in relation to other things. This is religion. What people do about the ecology, whether we can in fact nurture nature, depends upon what we think about ourselves in relation to it. And this in turn is obviously shaped by religion. As an anthropologist of religion, I tend to think of this as both deeply affirming and yet deeply troubling in fundamental ways. And so today I will speak about water, about the hydrosocial world, I call it, that is both bridge to other cosmologies in Hinduism and as well as an earthly moral theology of being. Here I will tell the story of Bangalore's many lakes to bring to the foreground what the Harvard anthropologist Michael Jackson has called an existential ethics. So from my diary, when the water burns. On February 17th, 2017, the water burned. The 2-mile-long Belandur Lake in the north of Bangalore caught fire. Smoke billowed from the water's surface, carrying the putrid smell of raw sewage and chemical pollutants across the village at its shore, all of which had been engulfed into the city of Bangalore. A dense white foam had covered the lake for several years. It was thick as shaving cream, soft as pillows, and the surface of the water could only be glimpsed when the froth broke up. The pre-monsoon winds that swirled through the city blew a soapy froth into the streets, where it covered vehicles and pedestrians alike in a stinging cloud of suds. These suds burnt the flesh they lit upon. They were lit from within with orange and blue flames, and occasionally people heard a sharp cracking sound, like when a lighter was, when someone used a lighter. The temple to Kateriamman, a wilderness goddess at the shore, had been engulfed in the toxic suds, and the outer walls of the shrine had been blackened. In a compelling yet tragic unaired interview shot that day, a woman named Gauri, a middle-aged Hindu, Tigala, that's a caste, a horticulturist caste, she was a resident of the Iblur village at the banks of this lake. In that video, she stood on the still smoldering lake shore. She said she had grown up near the lake in a traditional horticultural family. She spoke powerfully of her memories of the once verdant landscape and the clear waters of this lake. She spoke of the underground stream that bubbled beneath the deity of Kateriamman in the temple. She evoked the Hindu myth of the sacred region, in Sanskrit termed the Sthala Purana, the myth of a sacred place, where the water of the lake was not only sacred, it was life-giving, a vital fluid. But then she gestured despairingly to the fiery lake behind her, its shore littered with plastic bags, feces, and dead fish. And she said, "This lake is burning. This story of sacred place, the Sthala Purana, is now a terrifying tale, Bhayankara Purana." She coughed and then she cried, "The water burns. My lungs are on fire. The wilderness goddess is now absent. She's raped by developers. She has run away." Gauri's lament brings the ruination of such watery places to our attention. And I think, as following Kim Fortune, that ethnography in particular, that is what anthropologists do, tell the story of places and peoples, should play a crucial role in building something new. Walking in the gaps between established fields and categories, and ethnography can help, as Fortune says, bring forth a future anterior, not calculable from what we know now. It is a future that surprises, something beyond our expert formulas. In keeping with Fortune's vision, articulated in 2012, my project attempts to think beyond the formulaic into the future of water. It asks, if water is life, what is life without water? This is what I call a field work, what anthropologists do, a field work of suffering, of detachment, and of exile. As an anthropologist of religion, I rely on ethnographic accounts and encounters to make sense of the world, both sacred and not. And I rely on collaboration with interlocutors and their tellings of their lives. I began this ethnography in 2012. I saw the lakes diminish and change. The priests in my first book told me they could no longer decorate the images with lotus flowers as they were used to do, because lotus flowers no longer grew in the lakes of Bangalore. As the lake's toxicity began to define the megacity in development, a struggle Bangalore has in common with many developing urban centers in the places that Indian anthropologists frequent. Recently, I saw a statistics that said that of the 250 most polluted places in the world, 80 of these are in India. My memories of the lake, however, differ. As a child, they were a wonderland of rivers and rills, creeks and streams, alive with the sounds of frogs pulsating in the monsoon rains. And then they gave way in the summertime to marshy puddles filled with gray bubbling waters over which nests, there were trees with nests. But now they are only dead sludge, a stench of sewerage and fires of toxicity. So returning to the field became suffering and unbearable as I saw my home become uninhabitable for me. Until that point, I had harbored dreams of returning to a nourished India to teach, to learn. But as I watched Belandur burn, I realized that my self-chosen exile was now permanent. I was, to quote the anthropologist Mary Douglas, I was matter out of place. And I was doomed to remain so in America. The question I was left with was, what do you do when the place you have devoted your life to dies? In Hindu cosmology, there's a deep imagery for this apocalyptic end. The run-up to it is known as Kali Yuga, a moral unraveling, where ethics gradually and inexorably erodes. The ethical world is symbolized by a divine cow and becomes progressively lame as the aeons unwind, and as one hoof after another is chopped off, until in Kali Yuga it rests unsteadily on one hoof, waiting for the end. This end begins with the great god Shiva, who starts dancing in a fury, his dance known as the Tandava, a cosmic dance of annihilation, which brings the world as we know it, reality, and the multiverse to an end in Pralaya, or the great cosmic flood. It sweeps away the world, and so Shiva is placated. The dance changes into one of creativity, and he brings the world into being again. Here, his dance is technique and doom all at once. But to map the doom of my world, I turned to fieldwork via WhatsApp. The ubiquity of cheap cell phones all over India, even amongst the poorest of the poor in Bangalore, made visual hanging out and riding along very doable. I was there, not there, disembodied yet present. It was an exercise in staying with the trouble, as Donna Haraway has exhorted us to do. The ruined field came pinging into my phone via WhatsApp messages at 3 a.m., waking me in Boston. But these lakes, Belandur included, were part of my childhood memory of the city, as I said. I've bathed in their reedy waters. I've caught the glimmering sun on their waves. I've netted tadpoles in them as a child. I've unwittingly swum in their waters as I hauled my friends out when they fell in. I've gathered lotus blooms from them for the temple. I've lost my heart at their edge. I participated as an adult in lakeside rituals for various goddesses. But now in Boston, I weep for them. For this is the story of the runaway goddess. Okay. Repetition. Okay. Before I dive in, I'd like to undo two threads that are wound together within this project. The site of Bangalore is a place of thirst, and the way religion, particularly Hinduism, is implicated in the study of equal collapse. So my hometown of Bangalore was famous for its 1,000 pristine lakes. It was known as Kalyana Nagara, the land of 1,000 lakes. Here, the place on Kalyana, which is both a temple tank as well as auspiciousness. The water was associated with auspiciousness. Bangalore was a swampy lowland. It was a riparian wonderland of wetlands, rivers, streams, and rills, and it overflowed with life. The Pelandur Lake was the largest water body in the city, and a half-century ago, it was the only drinking water source for the entire north of the city. The lake is discussed in archival documents of the colonial era as the stage for liquid ritual events, at the Wilderness Goddess Shrine on the south bank of the lake. More than just metaphors to Hindu Bangaloreans, these sacred lakes are feminine. They are sentient guardians of the city. As a garden city, it was known as the garden city of wetlands and woodlands. Bangalore's lakes were usually given as grants to temples and monasteries by enlightened medieval rulers, both Hindu and Muslim. In perpetuity, the grants say they were offered for 21 generations, or as long as the sun and moon both rise. But in modern India, the lakes became public property, governmental property, and slowly became used not for drinking, but merely for leisure with concrete walkways at their shorelines. In the 1970s, there were still 285 lakes. This is the traditional lake next to the temple, the red and white striping of the temple, and the lake at the base of the granite hills. This was a typical sort of lake in Bangalore. And these were the orchards on the edge of the lake, coconut orchards. A lot of vegetables were grown on the edge of these drinking water lakes. This is Kateriyaman, the wilderness goddess. A very small image, but it is supposedly extraordinarily powerful, kept at bay many different kinds of diseases as well by protecting the wilderness. In the 1970s, there were 285 lakes in the city, but the violent alchemy that polluted these sacred waters took less than a few decades of economic neoliberalization to kickstart. Here you can, the Belandur Lake literally shrank physically between 2000 and 2013. By the early 2000s, Bangalore was the home to a successful information technology industry. It began to be known as the Silicon Valley of Asia. Its population doubled between 2000 and 2020, from 6 million to 12 million. And according to studies by the Indian Institute of Science in the city, rapid urbanization and expansion between 73 and 2016 caused a 1,005% increase in paved surfaces and a corresponding decline of 88% of the city's vegetation. The water bodies that in the 1970s were 285 fell to less than 80 in the early 2000s. Lakes were infilled, and the precious and expensive land below the lake was gifted to institutions such as universities and hospitals for building large buildings. One expected outcome of this attenuation of water resources in the city is that the city is perennially thirsty. The New York Times ran a piece today on water scarcity in Bangalore. Today. Every day, Bangalore pumps 1.4 billion liters of water through its pipes, and it still fails to meet the city's needs. It pumps it from the river Kaveri, which is in a gorge 1,000 feet below the city, pumping upwards. The problem is that most of the city's drinking water comes from this river. The river Kaveri is 60 miles away. It's in the deep gorge, 1,000-foot gorge. And so pumping water uphill to a thirsty city through leaky pipes is both difficult and expensive. As an engineer told me, in 2016, the city pumped 1,400 million liters of water to the city per day. And the cumulative cost of that pumping in US dollars was 800 million. And he said at least 40% of the Kaveri water is lost to theft and leakage. Now, Gauri stood in front of that Katariaman temple, wreathed in smoke from the burning. She asked, her voice rising in anger, "Are we expected to live in this world of filth? This lake has been trashed. Kere halagogbitide. It's gone to garbage. Look at it. What naraka? What hell is this? How can I live here now?" The lake is a ruin, as Gauri suggests, but ruins reveal a kind of decay. Tim Aidensor says, derelict sites and ruins are a fluid material state of becoming. Around the lake, the ruin of the lake, are software parks and housing estates. They form what we can call a toxic community, not merely ecologically toxic, but emotionally, financially, and physically as well. At Belandur, this toxic community is both global and intimate in its violences. There are real consequences to these successful mechanisms of neoliberal political economy, by which I mean the multiple intersections of a debt-ridden and apathetic municipality, hand in glove with neoliberal entities such as public-private partnerships and outright privatization and expropriation mechanisms of money and land. Here you can see Belandur just a few years ago. They were harvesting reeds for feeding cattle. You can see the traditional round coracle boats. This is the temple of Katariaman with the new luxury apartments behind. I visit the Katariaman temple with Gauri. Fishermen arrived drawing up their coracle boats from the lake, complaining about the lack of fish. After the fishermen have left with their families, carrying away bananas and flowers they had brought for the deity, the priest settles down for a chat with me and Gauri. He says he took over the Katariaman temple several decades ago as a boy. The Belandur tank was an open recharge lake at the time, and he said it was man-made, as were the shrines around. He added that Katariaman was a goddess, a wilderness goddess of the edge, Enunalli, he says, between land and water. As goddess of the wilderness, she could only stay in the Kadu, the forest, or the Kere, the tank. But today, she's on another edge, the edge of economic and ecological collapse. The violence of development bleeds through the community. As the city ecologist Harini Nagendra notes, changes in land use have led to ecological violence of pollution and scarcity. I have personally observed the destruction of water bodies in Bangalore from 2000 to 2018, having lived and grown up in the city. It was accompanied by rolling droughts when women like myself waited long hours to what is known as catching water when it arrived in the pipes. As you can see in the map, the destruction of the blue water bodies between 2000 and 2015. In worldly terms, a global water crisis is looming, and Bangalore, India, is for it. Shortage is likely to adversely impact some 600 million people, most of them women, who are responsible for meeting the water needs of the family, and the very poor. The second outcome, rarer, but still nonetheless catastrophic, and here again you can see in the images, this is the Belandur Lake between 2000 to 2013, and you can see the destruction. The green is the water body, and with the channels, the swampland with the channels of water running through it, and you can see clearly the development and how it erases the lake. A second outcome, but nonetheless catastrophic, is urban flooding. And this past monsoon season that ended less than a month ago, many Bangaloreans had to buy private boats to navigate the flooded streets. This is the movement of traffic during that time. The question of climate justice with regards to thirst and flood is obvious and looming. Changes in water lines indicate an unraveling of worlds. As life on the planet is unraveling in ways seen and unseen, we are also unraveling the natural consequences of the larger narratives of unconscious behavior that we are inflicting on populations, both human and animal and wild. This great derangement, to quote Amitav Ghosh, is a space where he says, the unthinkable often happens. This is understood as Kali Yuga, the last great epoch in the run-up to end times, where the world ends in flood. As you all know, water is an originary fluid in Hinduism, both in the mythic mind's eye and in logical texts. Vishnu, the immanent and all-pervasive God, floats on a watery sea known as the ocean of milk at the center of the multiverse. It's known as Ananta Shayana. He sleeps on a snake flotation device. His sleep symbolizes eternity. Water is known as up in Sanskrit. It is said to be primordial, and the world is spoken of as having been originally water without light, from the Salilam Apraketam of the Rig Veda, the oldest book. The gods of the waters are many. Apas is the god of water himself. Indra is the god of the storm. Varuna is the god of the sky, an upholder of Rita, or natural law. And finally, we have Parjanya, the god of the rain cloud. Assimilated into the everyday, water's difference, alterity, is made more potent and yet more manageable. It's used to bathe the idols of the gods as abhishekam, to drink as sacred water, tirtha, to purify the world as large, as prokshanam. In Hindu myth, too, the idea of life given by water is central. But here, water is female and fecund. In cosmology, it's a revered, fertile, feminine goddess. I'm sure you've heard of the Ganga, the great river of North India, seen as a feminine goddess who purifies anyone and everything she touches. In the south, the southern Ganga is the Kaveri, which flows very close to Bangalore. These riverine goddesses are symbols of fertility and beauty, and they bring abundant life to the earth of India through their pure waters. So water for Hinduism is a sacred fluid from which and on which the eternal and all-pervasive force of Godhead rests. The Rig Veda states it simply. Before life, there was darkness, wrapped around by darkness, and all around was water. Water in its form as lakes, as rain, as oceans, as rivers, as streams, has transformative moral agency. It opens up new political and ethical claims upon our world. I've got a little more to go. For Hindus, as David Haberman so eloquently points out in his work on the Yamuna, water purifies everything. Everything that it touches. It marks the boundary of South Asian civilization. Yet all these rivers today are terribly polluted, not only by sewage outfall from many cities along their shore, industrial effluents, in particular by dead bodies, human and other, and the detritus of modern life, plastics, etc. David Haberman suggests that Hindus see the physical pollution of the river as the accumulation of the many sins of human beings that surround the river. The Ganges carries the physical force of our sins, as do all water bodies in India. Back to Kartariaman. The fishermen point to the trash lake and they say with decisiveness, this is evidence of Kali Yuga. Soon they say, Lord Shiva will start to dance the Tandava, the cosmic dance that ends time. He will beat his drum, they say, and dance. How soon will he dance, I ask. Naively, they laugh and say, not soon enough. So in Hinduism, we can broadly say that water is the stuff of cosmology, birth, of beginnings, of endings, of purity, of care. Cycles of drought and flood, on the other hand, are part of our lives. And though they might be embedded in mythic and theological registers, they cause a sense of a disturbed sense of grief and lack of control, which I see Bangaloreans feel when they face the wrath of nature. In the sense, we can say water is both the womb and the tomb of all life. If with climate change, water scarcity and catastrophic floods become reality in India, it would seem that the Hindu sacred imagination offers our apocalyptic imagery in what the worlds reveal as they unravel. But in thinking of unraveling, we think of unraveling as something that unknits. But in terms of unraveling, perhaps we could think better of what it is we actually disentangle. And here, thus, unraveling becomes a way to unknit our assumptions about the world. Now, Gauri's son Mahesh works for a water pirate known by the name of Iqbal. Early one morning, a huge chocolate brown water tanker with yellow lettering. This is the Kaveri when she hits the plains of Tamil Nadu. And you can see why I'm so fond of this landscape. Gauri's son Mahesh works for a water pirate known by the name Iqbal. Early one morning, a huge chocolate brown water tanker with yellow lettering, Sri Ganesh Water Supply, stood in an open field. Mahesh, with floppy hair and an irritated expression, stood atop the tanker, pushing a large hose into the barrel. The hose was attached to a bore well, a cylindrical shaft punctured deep into the earth, deep into the heart of the aquifer on which the city of Bangalore sits. The pump whined. Once he was assured water was flowing, Mahesh sat back and lit a bidi, a cheroot, holding it between his thumb and forefinger, and he lazily blew out the smoke at me. After 4 cheroots worth of time, Mahesh got back into the cab of the tanker. He began driving through the narrow network of recently tarred roads in the suburb of Whitefield. He honked his horn frequently to pass through the congested streets thick with fancy cars, carts, stray dogs, Uber drivers, and rickshaws. I managed to catch this shot when there were not that many people. Turning into the parking lot of a Fortune 500 software company that shall remain nameless, Mahesh opened the valve of the tanker and allowed gallons of Iblur water to gush into the concrete cistern deep underground. Like the city of Los Angeles, Bangalore lies today in an arid plain. In 2018, an approximate 8,000 souls entered the city every single day. These newly minted Bangaloreans live in housing estates, apartments, sprawling into the rural hinterland, ingesting villages and gobbling up rural farmland across the Deccan Plateau, extending the city's footprint by 20 miles every single year. This city, metastasizing into a dystopian metropolis, gobbles up groundwater. Borewell operators say that 10 years ago, they had to dig 300 feet for water, and now they have to dig 1,000 feet, almost as low as the river Kaveri, they tell me. As the water table in the aquifer sinks, the lakes get drier and drier. As gravity drains the lakes to feed the aquifer, the rivers and swamps dry out as well. When the borewells go lower than the Kaveri, the river will completely dry up. More than half of Bangalore's water supply comes from private water pirates, unmonitored wells, pumping the water of the aquifer out with no supervision. A privatization piracy extraction scheme that goes unregulated because the city cannot fulfill its water mandate. The story of Bangalore's galloping water mismanagement resembles Jack Hawley's beautiful work on Vrindavan, where we can see a sacred river degrading. It raises the question of whether we can nurture nature, or whether our apprehension that the intersecting and multiplying problems of climate change has outstripped our capacities of ethical life, our capacities to understand religiously, our capacity to meet this challenge. A thought unbidden comes to me as I look at the images of the burning lake. Maybe drowning pralaya is not the end. Maybe thirst is. And then, just as suddenly as I lost hope, there it was. The question of repair pivoted into view. At dusk at the edge of another lake, on a paddy flat in Barakere village, I met Kempama, an elderly woman of the Bhovi caste. The Bhovi caste were famous all over India for they dug wells and lakes. They were water diviners. Traditionally, this well digging was a woman's task because it involved digging out mud. Though in the past century, it has been more controlled by men. Because now we use technology for the digging. Kempama sang a song to the water. To every place, she sang, you come to satisfy their thirst. To survive, we need water, O Mother Ganga Mom. You are the mother to the world. You are our mother. She told me how her mother and father could not drink at the wells that they built for fear of polluting them. since she comes from the lowest of the low caste. How many of her caste members were indigent, their work dismissed. She repaired the stone walls to the canal, she said, that led to the lake, and she sang songs begging the water to stay. These waters, she told me, are living beings that I birthed. No one cares for them anymore. Not even the crook who owns this land cares. I come here to fix the channels. Nord Koltini, I care for them, she says. All the medieval tanks around Bangalore were dug or dammed by a caste of Dalit. That is, if you want to think of caste as a hierarchy, they are lower than the hierarchy can accommodate. They're beyond caste in the sense. And Dalit means crushed. These Dalit well workers were known as Bhovis or Vaddars, and they built the step wells of Gujarat as well. They are most famous for their well digging and well construction abilities. In Bangalore, the Bhovis live in a colony. They were given to them by the government, known as Bhovi Palya, the village of Bhovis on the outskirts of Bangalore. Self-titled Dalits, previously known as untouchables, literally those who cannot be touched because their bodies carry the contagion of pollution, as their casted status. Their politics of dignity demands an indigenous recognition that has rocked India's upper castes, Savarna castes, and led to a divided society. The society was always divided, it's just recognized now. And much hand-wringing and defensiveness among Savarna groups. As an upper caste woman myself, I don't want to engage in further violence by ventriloquizing Dalit voices. So Kempama and her son Ramakrishna speak for themselves, though I record what they say. Kempama tells me, Bhovi madudu bhavi. Bhovis dig wells, she says. She explains there are two kinds of Bhovis. Mannuvaddars, those who build mud check dams like herself, and Kalluvaddars, those stonemasons who build the step wells. With increase in bore wells, such as those where Mahesh filled his tanker, Bhovis became beggars, she tells me. In an area where there are 5,000, all of them use Kaveri water, and only one or two ask them to clean out wells for a living. Ramakrishna, Kempama's son, is now a spokesperson for the Bhovi community. He described them as people who find water but have a chronic thirst. He tells me the story of how his grandfather and grandmother dug and cleaned wells for a living, dirty, hard, and dangerous work. They were paid a princely sum of 1 lakh of rupees just a few years prior to clean out the disused wells of a monastery in Mysore, the neighboring town. They spent a week cleaning the well, sleeping in the stone courtyard at night. When they finished and laced the water with acidic lye to make it potable and drinkable, the head abbot paid him and then escorted them firmly from the monastery to ensure that they did not touch the water, polluting it by their touch. The Anthropocene is blind to the ways indigenous and Dalit peoples like Kempama modify and manage landscapes through ritual practice at great social cost. Sensorial Dalit expression, the Dalit scholar Yengde, Suraj Yengde writes, is an experience of revelation of both the personal and the ecological. So I've been working on this ethnography over the past 6 years, and it would seem that the infrastructure of impotence and corruption of governance that leads to the climate crisis can only be managed through repair. Repair as religious imaginary located in an act of love, as Kempama does. Kempama's indigenous knowledge of where the water should flow and how it should flow, how it should be cared for, is a poetics of repair that's vitally ethical. It's a dharmic task, to put it in Hindu terms. And she makes it manifest and central. So her personal relationship with water in love and devotion becomes a sort of concrete lever of change. This is the circle of love and care that comes out of action, which provides a very solid basis for ecological concern. It is an expansion of our compassion to worlds that we have destroyed. So as life on the planet is unraveling in ways seen and unseen, we are also unraveling traditional knowledge. and larger narratives of behavior that we are inflicting on populations. Poor Tigala women like Gauri, men like Mahesh, offer a model of ethics that attaches moral agency to the natural world. By defining places as persons, Tigalas and Manuvadars, Bovis, re-signify nature itself as an anchor for social justice. If we think of repair and its allied form, reparations to people, it allows us to become attentive to the ways in which love can be made manifest in care. It allows us to differentiate different lineages of Hinduism that haunt the landscape of this cosmopolitan city. And it allows us to turn repair and reparation not only as making places as people, not only as kin making with lakes, but to create a lake where the runaway goddess can return. In July 2020, Gauri returned to the Kempama temple, wailing in fear, to pray to the goddess for Mahesh's recovery from COVID. Karteriamman used to be the goddess of cholera and other epidemiological disease. Mahesh was very sick and was in hospital needing oxygen. It was those damn BDs, she said. She had asked her neighbor, an auto driver, to take them to the hospital late at night when Mahesh could not breathe and he had turned blue. They had rushed to the emergency ward close to Belandur, where the doctor refused to treat Mahesh unless they paid in advance. He stayed in the auto rickshaw until dawn, the three-wheeler, when the pawn shops opened and Gauri pawned some of her jewelry. Many people in the Iblur slum were sick, she said, and had died. Gauri said Mahesh will only survive with Karteriamman's anugraha, her grace, her karuna, mercy, her daya, her care. His recovery will be due to only that, she says. In repair, I think we can find a theology of such grace, of such anugraha, to find ourselves acts of repair of our world. Finally, let me end with Kempama, whom I found on another cloudy monsoon evening at the edge of her village lake, anticipating the rain. She watched as a white egret fished in the water, and she sang a haunting melody. Look, the village lake is getting filled, she said. It is flowing into the canal, she sang. Oh, Mother, be kind and bless us. All of us have prayed to you, Mother. Be kind, bless us, come to us, she says. Thank you. These are the Manuvadras. I'll be quick, I'll just walk us through. And this is how many people live their lives in Bangalore.
Thank you so much for this beautiful, beautiful talk. It has made all of us, I'm sure, think in new ways, right, about pollution and beauty at the same time. Questions?
Okay, so thank you very much for this beautiful and very thought-provoking talk. I think my question has to do with Bangalore's current status as this very modern place. And the question I have is how you see this understanding of nature's moral agency, especially the water, translating to the people working these tech jobs or running these tech companies, and the extent to which that translation is possible, or what it would take to communicate this idea of nature across the different social strata. And I guess how kind of you see tradition and modernity in conversation with each other around these issues of how we conceive of nature. So I don't know if that's a coherent question, but that's the kind of general theme that I would be really interested in hearing more about. Thank you.
Should I answer each question? Yes, okay. I am, well, until about 10 years ago, the mantra for Bangalore was development, and that meant development to engineering and software industries primarily, because that brought jobs to the nation as a whole. It was seen as an epitome of smokeless development. So there was no question of tradition was expected to endure while we all went about modernity. But the lakes have become such a nightmare that beautifully, many of the people I spoke to who had great hope of recasting indigenous knowledge were engineers who had stopped being engineers. In fact, the New York Times had an article about one of them who is one of my interlocutors, who has gone about single-handedly restoring lakes using 700-year-old Chola ways of restoring swamplands. And he's gotten a lot of publicity for it, thankfully. And there are other sort of single individuals who go about sort of repairing things. They're talking about repairing the aquifer. There's a whole discourse. So don't get me wrong. I'm not the only one talking about this. There's a whole discourse amongst the ultra-modern, as there is in this country, younger generation, people who are concerned about this ecological devastation. But at the same time, the mantra for development in what was previously a poor country is very powerful and very seductive. And so we get these contrasting sort of pulls. Gauri was the only one who articulated it in terms of the goddess being homeless, which I thought was a really interesting sort of way into it, which I had not heard the engineers discuss. They talk about the lakes and sedimentation. And I had not heard priests talk about it the same way. So I thought that was a way in that was very powerful to talk about this as a person, as a child, as something you care about, as something you have a relation to. And undoubtedly, she was projecting her own homelessness that she felt would happen. I'm not answering your question, I'm rambling on, but I'm still thinking, as you can tell, I'm thinking my way through the problem right now. So it's still very alive for me.
I'm wondering if there are stories at all of how the goddess is reacting to this.
Yeah.
One of the goddesses that I study in Thailand, she's a tree goddess. And when the trees are fell and they go into the water, people hear her crying in the water. So I'm just wondering if there are these stories of the ways in which the goddess herself is agent and reacting to this and that.
I think that Gauri was indicating that COVID was an outcome of the goddess being homeless. That's why she comes there. I think there's some intuitive connection she's making there because the wilderness goddess was a protection against contagion. And if she is homeless, then the contagion spreads abroad, right? There's no controls of it. So I think she's making some connections there. It's not articulated, but everyone seems to get that this is these goddesses being homeless means that these bad things can befell us consequentially. They also talk a lot about goddesses not accepting gifts anymore. Like they used to accept these gifts, now they don't accept these gifts. We used to bedeck her in lotus flowers from the lake. Now the lake doesn't have lotus flowers, so we bring her other flowers, but she doesn't accept them because then it's not good enough. Things like that are said about her, but yeah, not specifically, but there's a world in which this is occurring.
Question.
I know, let me just quickly say, I know this is a real downer of a talk. I usually don't have any questions because people are just like absorbing this terrible information. So I'm not, it takes some time to sit with it. So I completely understand where you are. It's taken me several years to sit with it, and it's my home. But I think there are traces of it in every part of the world. And this is why I think it's really important, right? Gauri is just one person in this far off place, but she's articulating something that I think we can all feel. Can feel it in the way our winters change in Boston. I can feel it in the way summers are hotter. I can feel it in the way, you know, the Canadian geese in Boston just don't leave Boston anymore. We used to see them, they used to fly in for a couple of days and then they take off for Florida. They just don't leave. That means that the winters are not cold enough for them. So there's something in our, you know, we're ticking towards an edge. We don't know where that edge is. That's what Gauri is saying. She's articulating that we've reached the edge and gone beyond, fallen off the edge, right? And we don't know what the costs are. In rich countries like the United States, the discourse is around sea rise. And I was wondering, what is the discourse around sea rise, right? In poor countries, the discourse is around water scarcity. Cape Town, India, China. Though London also is talking about water scarcity. And I realized in the United States, it's about glaciers melting and very expensive real estate on the edge of the water going under, right? What will insurances do? This is a concern. Whereas for millions of people in the other part of the world, there will be no water to drink. These are two very different concerns, right? We're blessed to say that we won't be in that category. But then all those people, where will they go? What will they do? That keeps me up at night. It really does.
Any other questions? No? Well, once again, let us thank Leslie Srinivas for so
Thank you. Thank you. You're quite welcome. Thing. It is, do not buy plastic bottles of water. Do not leave the fridge open while you're making decisions about what to take out of it. These are things that, small things are acts of repair. They're really small things. Because 7 billion of us doing those small things affects other billions of us. And I am speaking, yes, for Gauri, and yes, for Kempama, and yes, for the people in Bangalore, but I'm also speaking for those Canadian geese and for the people who, for those beings that have no voice, like Carterium and the animals and plants that live around Bangalore or used to live around Bangalore. So thank you. Thank you for attention and your time.